Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Stephanie Stevens Show. I am Stephanie Stevens, and I will be your host for the next 30 to 35 minutes, maybe 45. I just want to say thank you guys so much for joining me here on my show. You guys have embraced the show a lot, and I just want to say thank you for sharing your stories. Today on our show, I asked a young man, I wrote something about one of the stories that one of the producers wanted to talk about, and it was about conservative people that attend church, religious people that are part of the LGBTQ pronoun community. So I asked a man to come on by the name of Mr. Charlie Dale. Now, Mr. Charlie Dale has three published books, novels. He's actually spoken at the National Assembly, and he's a female impersonator, and he's an avid church goer. Now, the reason I asked him to be on the show is because when he was talking to me about his story, he mentioned a few things that I think a lot of us can relate to. So I wanted him to share his story with us today here on the Stephanie Stevens Show because I thought that it would help educate and inspire others to just do the right thing. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome on my show today, Mr. Charlie Dale. How are you, Charlie?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me and having this conversation.
Oh, you're welcome. Now, was that an okay opening? Did I say everything correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, how do you identify?
Openly gay. I came out publicly at 18. I knew much earlier than that I was very different. I didn't have the language for that because I grew up in a very small community about 45 minutes south of Cleveland. The community is still very small. There's only one traffic light. A Dollar General just went in a couple months ago, and it's the only major business in town. It was the kind of community where everybody knew everybody. I don't know if that's still the case because I fled the country
Oh.
to the big city at 18 and didn't look back because of who I knew I was. The bullying started and the language came from what I was at 13 in the 7th grade. You know, all of the language that we all hear is openly gay men, sissy, gay, faggot, all of this stuff. And it was horrible. So I grew up Southern Conservative Baptist, very, very strict, very straight-laced, you know, no TV, no movies, no music that you couldn't sing to or listen to in church. You weren't allowed to be friends with anybody that was not Baptist or Southern Baptist, you know, a different religion. That was out of the question. There were just a lot of rules, and that's the way I grew up. So my parents didn't follow a lot of the rules, thankfully. You know, like we did have a TV. My mother loved rock and roll music and African American blues and Mahalia Jackson, and I was exposed, thankfully, to all of that. But it was this, like I said, it was this very conservative upbringing. And in the 7th grade, our church opened a Christian school. So I knew that if I went to the Christian school that our church ran, the bullying would stop. So I begged my parents to send me there, and I went there from the 7th grade to the 12th grade. Unbeknownst to me, though, we weren't certified. We were never state tested. And when I graduated from there, I technically did not have an Ohio State diploma, which I did not find out about till I was almost 21. So I ended up going.
Where are you living now?
A little tiny town south of Cleveland called Canal Fulton. It's a suburb. We're about 5,000 people. I've lived here 17 years. I moved from Cleveland in 2003 in July, so it's actually 17 years this month. I like it. It's certainly different than living in the city, and it was an adaptation from not knowing, you know, a circle of friends that knew everybody to a town where, again, everybody knows everybody. And I was the newcomer.
Oh, so you moved from where?
From Cleveland to Canal Fulton
Okay.
in
Oh, so
2003.
Cleveland's a big city.
Yes, ma'am.
And for a gay male, living in a small town would seem different than why would you move from a big city to a small town?
I met someone.
Oh,
We've been together 17 years. I wasn't
hmm
looking when we met. We're in a monogamous relationship. We had a commitment ceremony that October.
hmm
And it seems like my life, the men that have come into my life, and I've had 3 major relationships, have all come at the time where I wasn't looking. I and at
okay.
one point actually swore them off.
Oh, okay.
But
Now, now, you know, I'm from Orlando. I always tell everybody that in the video because I want them to understand that I understand Southern people and I understand the Baptist church very well. My parents lived Christianity all day, every day. Now, let's go back to when did you find out, when did you figure out that you were gay? When did you know?
I knew I was different. I'm going to be 54 in November. So
Okay.
some of my references the younger generation might not get, but
Mm-hmm.
I knew um, very early on, my first crush as a little boy was Cubby from the Mickey Mouse Club. I had feelings towards him. I thought he was
Mm-hmm.
cuter than the Dickens. Like I said, I didn't have the language for it though, because there
Mm-hmm.
was no real representation on TV at that time of gay
Mm-hmm.
people. And my Aunt Chris, actually, my Aunt Chris is my mother's best girlfriend. They were girlfriends from the time of middle school till my mother died 3 years ago. And I've
Mm-hmm.
called her Aunt Chris all my life.
Mm-hmm.
My Aunt Chris told me 2 years ago that my mother started writing letters to her about the time I was 3 or 4 that I was different, but my mother didn't know
Mm-hmm.
what it was because she didn't know anybody gay either. And
Mm-hmm.
between the two of them, as time rolled by and I grew older, they figured it out that that's what it was. And of course, my mother, being my mother, left it up to me
Mm-hmm.
to figure it out on my own because when I came out to her, she's like, "Oh, honey, I knew all along." And I told her at 21. And I turned to her and I said, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" And she's
Mm-hmm.
like, "Well, you had to figure it out for yourself, darling."
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did.
Okay.
But
Now, what kind of family structure did you grow up in?
well, they're my mother and my father. It
Mm-hmm.
was my mother's second marriage. She was 19 when she married my father. She had been married before to a very abusive man. And the last
Mm-hmm.
argument they had, he flew her down a flight of stairs.
Okay.
Now, growing up, my father was very verbally and emotionally abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And over the 51 years of, I think it was 51 years of marriage that they were married, my mother tried to leave 3 separate times in my
Mm-hmm.
teens. Now, my mother never finished high school. She didn't have a job till she was in her 40s. She didn't get her GED until she was in her 40s. And so, with 2 little boys and her second marriage, there was nowhere to go. And when I figured that out later, much later, it really broke my heart that she felt that she had no options.
Mm-hmm.
They're never really open about what prompted her to leave. Um, I wish she had.
Mm-hmm.
We, her and I grew up very close. My father worked in a paper mill from the time I was born till about the time I was 5. So he's never there. So it was just my mother and I. My brother was born when I was 4, and of course he was daddy's golden boy. Followed my father everywhere, did everything together, did all of the boy stuff where I was mama's boy. You know, we
Okay.
cleaned, we cooked, we canned, we sewed. I watched soap operas.
So this was all from your mother's first marriage.
Second one to my father.
Oh, okay.
first one she never
both
really
you
talked
and your
about.
brother.
Right. The first one she never really talked about. There were no children, but it was just very abusive, and she was very young.
Okay.
I think they married at
Now,
18, and she was divorced right before she turned 19.
so how long was she with your first with your stepfather?
Well, he's not my stepfather.
Oh, your father.
He was just the first marriage.
Oh, the first marriage.
And my
How long
father,
was she with him?
right, with my father, they were married about 51 years before she
Oh,
died.
okay. Now, were they Christians?
My mother was. My father didn't go to church till maybe I was 13 or 14. He wasn't raised religious. My grandmother called that side of the family Shanty Irish. We weren't Baptist, we weren't Catholic, we weren't really anything. That side, where my mother's side of the family, her grandfather was Catholic. She was raised Catholic, and then he converted when she was a little girl to become a Protestant. And as a young woman, my mother and my grandmother both became Baptists before I was born. And that's what I was raised.
Okay, now, because I'm trying to connect it all. This
Right.
is why I'm asking so many questions
It's a
about.
lot.
You understand. So now, did your mother go to church religiously, and was she involved in the church?
Oh, yes.
Was she involved in the church?
Yes, ma'am. She taught Sunday school. She had a program at a nursing home where we went in, or she went in, from the time I was a little boy till I was in my mid-20s, and taught flannel graph stories. So it's like, a flannel piece of material on the back with a drawing that's done in marker, and then these paper figures with flannel on the back that's stuck to the flannel on the material, and told Bible stories to the senior citizens in nursing homes. And then we would sing songs from church. She did that for a good 20 years. She wrote missionaries overseas letters all the time, and I would anxiously await those letters because my mother got me collecting stamps from the countries of those missionaries when I was a little boy. And when missionaries came to the church, the first person they wanted to meet was my mother and not the minister. She taught Sunday school. She sang in the choir. I sang in the choir. I taught junior church. I went to Christian school. I started the church library. At one point, I was a volunteer church secretary. My father became Sunday school superintendent at one point. He drove the church bus. I mean, we were involved.
So, okay, yeah.
Sunday night, Wednesday night.
Oh, okay. So that's what I wanted to get. Were you guys actively involved in the church?
Yeah.
Now I see your connection to the church, which is a good thing because coming from the South, and generally people from small towns that grow up in Baptist churches, they're very close-knit communities, they're very close to the church. Everything is connected.
Oh yeah, it's very cult-like.
And now, what made you think when did you know you were just different to the point to where that your parents said something?
My parents never said anything about my being different, ever. I left home at 18, lied to my parents that I was going to art college, and moved to Fort Lauderdale. That was, I was 18 going on 19, so that was 1986. And I moved there because I had a boyfriend who was much older than I was. And we lived together. And I worked as a cocktail boy part-time, and worked in a major retail store, upscale.
Where did you live in Fort Lauderdale?
On the beach in a condo. I can't remember the exact address. It was so long ago.
Oh, so it was on Lauderdale Beach.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
that's where I lived.
Hopefully, I was there.
I was born in Orlando, and I grew up in Fort Lauderdale in Miami.
Yeah.
So
I was there. I was there from 86 to about 88.
Okay.
And my lover, he became my lover. He died in October of 88, and I moved back home. And that was
Okay.
around the time that I found out that I didn't technically have a high school diploma. So I
Mm-hmm.
enrolled back into high school, day to day, not a GED,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what I
Okay.
wanted to do to get a high school diploma. So if I wanted to pursue college, I could.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had tried to, and the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale said no, because you don't have a high school diploma. So when I moved home, it was back into the house, and I ended up going back to church. Of
Okay.
course, because that was the rule. You live at home, you go to church.
Yeah.
And at that point, I knew I was gay. I had a lover. I had been performing in drag in Fort Lauderdale for
Mm-hmm.
about a year and a half, two at the most.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, I don't know if I was well known or not.
Okay. So
I'll
did
give
you
it
know
to
did you
you.
know Tiffany Aragus and Dana Manchester and Nikki Adams? Did you know them?
Yes, I did.
Because those are women I grew up with,
Yeah.
and a lot more. Belle Kincaid and Maxine
Oh,
Allen, Letitia
yeah.
Ron, all those girls from the Copa. You remember
Oh,
the
yeah.
Copa?
Yes,
So
I do.
um,
Vividly.
yes.
A
Now
lot of time
okay.
spent there.
Now you say you published 3 novels. What are they about?
Three different books. The first is In God's Silence. It's a creative nonfiction story about the treatment of homosexuals during World War II.
Okay.
All true stories that were gathered and compiled and then added and expanded to make a story with a cast of characters. And then the names of the characters came from registries with the National Holocaust Memorial. So
Okay.
somebody's first name, somebody else's last name, all but one, which is the
Okay.
mother, which is my great great grandmother's first name. And it was my honors project when I graduated with my bachelor's degree. The second one, and I have them right here.
Okay.
The second one is a collection of short stories and essays and poetry that I wrote while I was in college
Okay.
that I published. The third one, which was the hardest to write, is my own memoirs. Freeing
Okay.
myself one man's journey with AIDS, because I'm a 29-year survivor, 29-year survivor this year with actually next week, 29 years living with AIDS, full-blown AIDS.
You
And I
know,
decided when I
amazing.
decided when I decided to write my memoirs, I decided to be brutally honest about everything. And if people didn't like what they were reading, I felt they could skip to the next paragraph.
Okay. Were the
Take
first
them
two
out.
books were the first two books fiction or
The
real?
first one, the first one was creative nonfiction, so there
Okay.
is a fair amount of truth to the story, but there are some minor elements that were expanded, not a
Okay.
lot. And locations, some of the names were made up of like bars and streets, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of research, and some of the bars are real and some of the streets are real, but some of them are not.
Mm-hmm.
All
You
of the
know,
names,
I'm oh sorry. I'm sorry.
sorry,
Go ahead.
all of the names are real as well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there's very little that's made up. The
Okay.
second one was just it's all made up because it's
Okay.
stories that I felt needed to be told, and then all of the stories and all of the essays and all of the poetry in the second one are from a gay point of view.
Mm-hmm.
The third one is all true because it's all my life. From the
Okay.
time I was a little boy until I wrote it for my master's degree in creative writing, and that was 5 years ago, so 2010. And the
Mm-hmm.
story is basically 1985 to about 2002, 2003, and that's where the story stops.
Okay.
That's the thrust of the story.
Okay. Now, were any of the books made into a movie?
Oh, girl, I wish.
Oh.
Your mouth to God's ears.
Now, it's a great thing that you wrote the last book. The reason that last book caught my attention, the memoirs about you living with AIDS all these years and surviving and doing well. Because generally at 58, most people that would have been diagnosed with AIDS would have already passed on.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, we,
Every single person that I was close to, that I knew in Fort Lauderdale, except me, is
mm-hmm,
gone. 60
mm-hmm,
people from that time frame that I knew are gone.
mm-hmm.
And between 1985 or 1986, when the first person I knew that died, and 2002, my previous partner, we were together 10 years. He died in 2002 of HIV complications. I counted every single person. And from that time in 85 to 2002, there's 600 names.
Oh, yeah, you know, it's miraculous that we have survived so long with so many different things that they thought that we wouldn't live to see either a
Oh,
vaccine
yeah.
for or a cure for. And technology today is amazing. The internet is another amazing thing that has happened. And the fact that we now can communicate and we can help each other by
Mm-hmm.
communicating. And like I said, this is why I was so glad when you reached out to me about your story, because it just is something that we can all relate to in some sense. We either know somebody that's HIV positive, or we know somebody that's died from AIDS, or we're living with AIDS, and these kind of things. Now, are you actively involved in the church now?
Uh, yes, recently, actually.
Okay.
Um, I left the church
Okay.
in 1988,
Okay.
January, because I was sexually assaulted to the point
Mm-hmm.
that it would be classified as a hate crime. It
Mm-hmm.
was December. Our minister's son invited me over to the house for pizza. His family was on vacation, everyone except him. And the next thing I knew, I was on the floor with a gun pointed at my head, and he was raping me.
Mm.
I ended up leaving that house with 3 cracked ribs, a broken arm, a fractured leg, and a minor concussion.
Well, what
And
was
I,
the?
and a gun pointed to my head the entire
Mhm.
time
Okay.
because he had heard rumors that I was gay.
Oh, okay.
And of course, no one knew anything about anything. I was silent on the
Mhm.
whole thing.
Okay.
So I fled. It was a year later. I turned to my mother and I asked where my mother was, and she said that my brother was with the person that sexually assaulted me, and I fainted. And I woke up on the ground, and my mother's looking over me. She's like, "What on earth is going on?"
Mm-hmm.
So I had to come clean about, first of all, the assault, and then about being gay, and about losing a lover because my parents didn't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother was with him. Now, whether something happened to my brother, I don't know. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure. It's something he will not talk about at
Mm-hmm.
all.
Okay.
I do know that there are at least 6 or 7, if not more, people that man assaulted, both men and women, besides myself.
Mm-hmm.
So when I left, I I questioned everything, of course, my faith, my
Mm-hmm.
upbringing, why I believed what I believed, why I felt the way I felt. I went into therapy for almost 3 years, and I wandered. So I dabbled in Mormonism, Lutheranism, Catholicism, Judaism, which was the longest and most extensive stay anywhere was in Judaism, because
Mm-hmm.
my first lover was born and raised Hasidic Jewish,
Okay.
and we practiced Judaism when we were together. And when he died in '88, I sat Shiva for 10 days, that period of mourning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's where I found comfort because it seemed like, with everyone dying of AIDS, there was no time to mourn. And I don't know about you, but my experience was it seemed like all of those memorial services and calling hours was all these good looking gay men in good looking suits, cocktail in one hand and hors d'oeuvre in the other hand, and they were cruising each other on the side. We did what we had to
Mm-hmm.
do to survive, and I get it and I understand it. But for me, it was about can't we just take the time and remember the person that's died, at least for a little bit? So Judaism brought that for me. And then in December, we started going to church again, St. Francis de Sales in Akron, the week of Christmas. And it felt so good. And Father Blind, David Blind, who was just recently promoted to the spiritual director for St. Mary's Seminary, was the pastor there. And I had this, I don't know if you would call it a breakdown in church, but the other pastor there is Father Jacob Bearer. And he had this service where he asked people who felt that they needed some kind of healing, whether physically, spiritually, or emotionally, to please stand. And I was going through a really dark period when that happened. And I just sat in the pew sobbing, knowing that I needed to stand more than anybody else. And I couldn't do it. And I didn't do it. So I called Father David and I made an appointment and I sat down with him. And I was very open and honest about my past, who I was, what I was, where I came from, how I grew up, my wandering in faith. And he's like, God loves you where you are, who you are, what you are, where you've been, and that's all that matters. It changed everything. Everything. And his Sunday sermon, well, the two of them, their Sunday sermons or homilies changed everything. They're both very quite modern, hip, if you will, current, relevant.
Okay.
And for Father David, it was about taking me back to that point when I was 11 years old and I was baptized in the Baptist church. Before,
okay. I was going to ask you that. Were you baptized?
Yeah. Take me back to that point before everything else happened. And when I sat down to have my first confession, that was his big point.
I'm sorry to cut you off, because you're supposed to be baptized before you're 13, right?
Well, I don't know about Baptist. It's like shortly after you're saved. And I was saved as a little boy, the Salvation Road that they talk about within Baptist church and conservative Christianity. And I did that early on, and I was baptized at 11. And Father David's point was, taking me back to that point before everything else had happened.
Okay.
And kind of starting over again, and that no matter what anybody thought or felt or said, God loved me no matter what. And he wanted the best for me. And all he wanted me to do was to come home and have some kind of faith base. And growing up the way that I did, our pastor was one of those self-appointed, self-anointed, never went to college of any kind pastors. Never, no religious training, none of that. Just, I'm going to be a pastor, hip, hip, hooray. Let's do it. And he did it. Not right, but that's what he did. And at least with Catholicism, there's a base. There's someone overhead the local parish. There are rules and guidelines that need to be followed by, and it's, for me, it's close enough to Christianity that I'm comfortable enough.
Now,
it goes back to the way my mother was raised.
Yeah, I understand. Let's go back to the little boy that was the minister's son that molested you. Did you ever tell the minister that his son molested you?
No, I did
when
not.
You told your mother, why didn't she tell him?
I don't know. I never told anyone within the church. I just fled. And when my father told me, well, in order for you to leave, you've got to tell them why, I made up this cockamamie story. I don't even remember what I said because it's now 33 years ago. This cockamamie story of why I was leaving. And I believe a lot of what I said at the time was about race. because our pastor was very racist. You know, the whole curse of Ham thing, and that the African American community came out of that, which is a bunch of baloney. And the majority of my education in college, my focus, as you can see on the back wall, is African American literature.
Okay.
So that's what I know the most about, and that's what I'm drawn to. So, and I never felt the way they felt or taught or preached about race the way that they did. And in such a small community, didn't really know anybody of color either until I was like 17, because our community was so small in the middle of nowhere, literally.
Now,
but when I moved, you know, exposed to all of these people of color and genders and gender identity and how they term themselves, and thankfully language and terms have changed a lot in the years since coming out, and it's now a much broader spectrum, thankfully.
So did you ever feel like you needed to get revenge?
No.
Or you need to stand up for, I mean, for you to have suffered so long, you would think with you carrying that burden, you would eventually need to
really... I did. I was very, very angry and very upset and emotionally troubled about the whole thing for years. A lot of it started to lift when I started talking about it, when I went to get my master's degree, because in order to have my master's degree in creative writing, we had to go, the university was Fairfield University in Connecticut. It's a Catholic Jesuit college. And we had to go with a story that we were all, everybody in the class was going to talk about. So I went with one that was good, short, but good. And then we got to talking, you know, in the circle and about my experiences in my life. And they're like, oh, honey, the story you've got is good, but that's not the story you need to tell. The story you need to tell is your own. That's the story that needs told. And that's when I made the decision, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And that's when I finally really started talking about it and starting talking about it publicly. And this is the first, really, this is the first huge opportunity to do it on such a large platform, about my past, about the attack, about all the hurt and anger and shame. There was a lot of shame as well, you know, and blaming myself that the attack happened because I was gay, and the two were very separate issues.
This person doesn't live in the same town as you now, does he?
No. Oh. He lives in West Virginia. He's a pastor of a church now, or was. Haven't had contact with him in any way, shape, or form since that night, and don't want any.
Well, it's good that you. It's good that you're. So, like you said, your release is the fact that you're talking about it now, and as we get older, sometimes we just sort of have to separate ourselves. Yeah, we can't. We have to stop looking behind us.
Right,
and a lot of what's in front of us. My mother used to always tell me that. Stop looking back there. Look what's in front of you.
A lot of it was released when I was confirmed as Catholic on June 1st of this year. It felt like that all of that pain and anger and hurt and searching, and does God exist? How does God exist? And my thoughts on that are very, very wide, very liberal. He's not a he, he's not, you know, not a he, not a she, not any color, not any ethnic background. God is very broad-based in my thinking, very broad-based. And when I was confirmed, all of that emotion was just released. It was like this huge weight was gone. And there's video, short little video of me being confirmed, and I'm just sobbing. And not out of pain or anger, but of joy, because it was all, 33 years of pain finally over with, and I'm finally home. I finally have faith again.
Okay. So that means that
I'm comfortable now.
Well, you felt good about the community. I mean, about the community church support. The
Yes,
church
there are a few.
support.
There's a few people in our church that know that we're gay. Oh, you know, we're gay, and that
Mm-hmm.
we're together. A smaller group of people, very small right now, that know I'm living with AIDS. Maybe four people,
Mm-hmm.
five at the most.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they find out. They find out. You
Mm-hmm.
know, my
What do
grandmother
you,
used to say, "It's their problem, not mine."
well, as we get older, we realize those things. We have to let people decide what they want to do for themselves, and you just do what you do.
Oh
Now,
yeah.
what I found strange is this. I saw this a few times. I wasn't going to ask about this, but I thought you could enlighten us on this. You know, in the last few years, they've been talking about gay men in the church who they think they can change into heterosexual men. That doesn't work. I mean, I mean, I,
No, no.
I mean, I'm sure you've heard that, right?
Oh yeah, I was one of those. Once the language started, and the teasing started at 13, I was
Hmm.
one of those that would pray every single day for it to go away, not to be that way. I never dated girls, never kissed a girl, never, if I can be blunt, never really saw one naked until I was like 27 or 28, and that was on the old Las Vegas Strip, with the awning.
Yeah.
um, we were my partner at the time. We were there, and there was a little sign on the sidewalk that said "free strip show." I'm like, "Oh, come on, let's go in." And he had been married before, three times to women, and then I was the second or third relationship as a man. He's like, "I'm sorry, been there, done that. You wanna go ahead, go ahead. I'll wait on the park bench." And went in, and there's this woman on the pole spinning in the air, and that was my first exposure. I didn't stay long.
Oh, that's so funny. You sound
Well,
so much
walked
like.
out, and he's like, "Well, what do you think?" And I'm like, it is what it is. Not my cup
Mhm.
of tea. That's why I'm with you. But
You sound like one of the producers from the show. He always, I asked him had he ever been with a woman, and he gave me that look of death. He said, "No, I have not." And I was like, "Well, you've never kissed one? No. You've never slept? No." I said,
no,
"You've never No." I was like, "Okay,
friends,
okay."
yeah, friends call me the golden gay
Oh.
because I've never done any of those things.
Well, you know, I always thought, how
The,
dare how dare gay men actually put themselves in another terrible situation to let someone convince them that they can be different than what they are, and just it took them so long to accept who they were in the first place, and now you have someone who is supposed to be that love and support and embrace you for who you are as a human being, and yet they're sitting there saying, okay, we're gonna forget about you need a place to live, you need love, you need support, you need understanding, but yet we're gonna focus all of our attention on the fact of your sexuality. Now we
right,
know, coming from the South and coming from any real small town and religious town where people spend a lot of time in the church, we know those hidden secrets of the church because
oh, honey.
we live within that community.
Yes, we do. And I can't remember who said it first, but there are those church ladies
Hmm.
with the hats that are also fashionable,
Oh
and it's
yeah.
this show every Sunday, and these good, upstanding, moral Christian women in the pew,
Hmm.
and then service is over, and the claws come out. I think it was Ginger Minge talked about it, and
Oh.
then read everybody for filth. Girl, I lived for those people. I loved
Hmm.
them more than anything because I could relate.
You know,
I
I
sit on the
used
sidelines and listen. It's like, ooh.
now you
I
know
think that's where I
that.
learned how to read.
Now you know, mainly in the South, we have a lot of how did my mother used to say it, because she was very, I'm gonna be honest, my mother and father were together until they died. and they had three children. And I never saw my father go out on my mother. I think that he just loved her. But there used to be a lot of people in the neighborhood because, you know, it's from the South. This is what they called it, jumping over the fence.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
Now, those people were the same people that went to church every day and said that they were just so holier than thou. They've been anointed, they've been baptized, they've been touched by God. They're supposed to deliver the spirituals, and yet they were the ones jumping over the fence. Because when you think about it, today we have the Mulvey Pulvis show for a reason.
Yes, we do.
When you think about the South, either the wife was married to her husband and they had very large families, but there was always somewhere along the line you had 2 or 3 of the children that didn't have the same parents.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you said earlier, your mother was married before, and then she ended up marrying her husband, who she was in love with, because that's generally where children come from, is either out of love or out of hopefully planned parenthood, or just the fact of them just loving each other and doing everyday things, and it's just things happen.
Right.
When you're married and you're in a relationship. Now, what's a typical day like for you now? Like, what's a typical day like for you? I mean, you and your partner. I mean, what's a typical day like for the two of you?
Oh, we're very boring.
Oh.
Other than the fact that this last weekend, July 4th, was the first time I had done drag in 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
I retired in 2003. It was shortly after my partner had died from HIV, and I was diagnosed that January with my first round of Kaposi sarcoma.
Mm-hmm.
So those skin lesions the people with AIDS had, and I've had that 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And my health plummeted in 2003, so I retired. My best friend that I've known 30 years, Mona Del West, asked me to do an appearance this July 4th weekend at Circle JJ's. So it was the first time in 18 years that my foot hit a stage, and I didn't realize how much I missed it until I was in full drag, which is the photo I sent you from that weekend.
Mm-hmm. You look great.
And I had people who knew me from then, and it's like, and their comment was, "Oh, girl, you ain't missed a beat. You might be.
You look like one of the Golden Girls.
20 years older, but you've not missed a beat."
I mean, the makeup was perfect. You look great.
Thank you so much. But you know, my days are a lot of it is writing. I'm working on my 4th book now. Researching. I sew. I paint. I draw.
Now, I want to just ask you this because it always comes up. You know, I'm an American and I have dual citizenship, so I can live in Canada and work in Canada. I have all my benefits. I can do what I want, and I can go back home and do the exact same thing. Now, in Canada, we have free health care. How is it? Now, you know, the people here in Canada, they really need to be educated because they used to say back in the days when I wasn't a citizen at the time, they used to say, oh, you're just here for the health care. You're here for this and that. And it's like, you know what? I am not here for no health care. I am here for this show to make my money and do what I'm doing. And just so happened along the way, they kept me here because the money was good and that's why I stayed here. And the opportunity was great. Had nothing to do with no health care, nothing, because I didn't need no health care. If I got sick, I would just go to the hospital and do whatever. But with my visa came a health card. So if I was sick, I could get health care. I could, because they take care of the citizens here. You don't have to worry about, you can go to the hospital all day, every day, and you never get a bill here.
Right.
So now, you said that, you know, I just want to understand the healthcare system in the U.S., just simple terms.
All right. Well, 91, I was diagnosed HIV positive, and by 92, it was full-blown AIDS.
Okay.
T cells below 200, and I'm 5'10", and at that time, the only thing I really remember was my dress size, and I was a 5'6".
Oh, well, I wear a size 8, 8'10".
So it was not pretty at the
Oh,
height that I was.
okay.
Damn, it was not pretty. It was
Okay.
rather scrawny. So I ended up on Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security disability, and Social Security income. And I've been there ever since.
Okay.
There was a period of about a year and a half last year and before where I did work part-time, which is the first time I had worked in a long time,
Mm-hmm.
because being on Medicaid, Medicare, they cover all of my medicine. And my medicine right now, today, is around $5,500 or $5,600 just for my HIV meds, not counting the stuff I take for my arthritis, my cholesterol, my heart, because I had a
Mm-hmm.
major heart attack 5 years ago, right before I graduated with my master's degree that was brought on
Mm-hmm.
because of living with AIDS for so long,
Mm-hmm.
and then some of the other stuff that I'm on. So technically, my medical bills are probably around $6,000-7,000 a month,
Mm-hmm.
which I make that a year.
And well, I just want to make it clear to people
You know,
out there that
and
understand
then
that.
the other thing too is we have finally here legalized gay marriage, and it's only happened within like the 5 or 6 years. But if
Mm-hmm.
I do that, legally marry, I lose my Social Security income completely because we're only allowed
Mm-hmm.
to make so much. And then I'm penalized because of the earnings that my husband would be making with his Social Security. So my payments to receive Medicaid, Medicare would skyrocket.
Okay.
So I, even if I want, and I would like to, but get married, but I can't because
Okay.
I can't afford to do that. And I think it's not just gay and lesbians, it's also any senior citizens in the same position is receiving Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare that they can't legally marry because it would change what they're paying out. And there's no
Mm-hmm.
money to pay if you're losing money.
Mm-hmm. Well,
This is
Charlie,
big
I just want,
too.
yeah. I want to say this. I wanted to clear, I'm glad you cleared it up that your medical bills are
They're
paid
horrible.
through
They're
medical,
horrible.
Medicare and all of that. And this is not even with your relationship, just so people can understand that Americans aren't just the American government just going to forget about their citizens. Because that's
Oh
the way
yeah,
the
big
people in
time.
Canada, the
Big
people
time.
in Canada think that America has forgot about its citizen when it comes to health care.
Big
And
time. I mean, and not just prescription coverage, but the thing that irritates me the most, and I'll be very blunt, is, allegedly, according to CDC and the NIH, HIV/AIDS is now this long-term, manageable, chronic illness.
mhm,
And
okay.
there are only a handful of us that are long-term survivors. And by that, I mean 25 years or more.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody is doing anything in any way, shape, or form in research or looking at our health issues or anything. And if this is the case, there's this whole generation that's much younger than I am that are going to
Mm-hmm.
live a lot longer than I am with this disease that we are going to know nothing about because we are
Mm-hmm.
not doing anything with the people that have already lived 25 years or more. And nobody's
Mm-hmm.
going to care.
Well, I,
Irritating as well.
I I
Love
wanted,
it.
I wanted to say this, that, it was great that you had the church to reach out to. And it's great to see that even in this day and time and age, they still preach the word of God and still try to peddle that thing in your mind you can change, or they feel that you're doing something that is against God's will, but yet they still embrace you with that touch, but yet whispering in your ear at the same time. But at the end of the day, it's great to at least know that we've made some progress and some steps towards actually having the courage to go into the church and just be who we are. And whether or not they accept us or not, we continue to go back to the church because of our faith and because of the way we feel.
Right. And within the Catholic Church, there's this organization called Dignity, that's geared towards the gay and lesbian community and welcoming back gay and lesbian members within the Catholic Church. Our church, unfortunately, doesn't have one of those at the moment, but at least there's that platform available. And the thing that I really remind myself about, and maybe people need to hear that are from a religious background, Jesus Christ's most beloved person ever was a former whore, Mary Magdalene. Jesus hung out with lepers. And in the 80s and 90s, there was nobody more leprous than people living with HIV and AIDS, period. And Jesus never said one single solitary word about being gay or lesbian or trans or anything else. It was love thy neighbor as thyself. And let him or her without sin cast the first stone. To which I add, here's your rock, honey. You have at it.
Okay. Now.
No, have at it. Here's your rock.
Well, I'm really glad that you're in a stable relationship. You've come to terms with who you are and what you're going through, and you've actually discussed it with the church. You've had dialogue with the church. You've had dialogue with your partner. You've had dialogue with me. You've had dialogue with a lot of people. You've had the courage to do something that other gay men would never have the courage to do. You wrote 3 successful books. You're now in your 4th and you've graduated with a master's degree. For me, this is achievement. This is success that gay men and women, or just people in the LGBT, just people in general, should strive to just do the right thing and just be who you are.
I think a lot of it goes back to because I've been living with AIDS for so long. And I realized early on you only get one shot. One life. That's it. And we aren't guaranteed how long we have. And when I went from just HIV positive living with AIDS, I was told at one point, oh, you have 6 months to a year to live. And that was now 28 years ago. So I've lived on borrowed time. And going back to college was the smartest thing I've ever did in my life. And I don't know if I could have really done it in my 20s. I waited till I was in my 40s. And I'm glad I did, because all of that life experience and everything that I went through made me secure in who I was and what I thought. And college really changed, even me changed a lot about how I thought and opened doors to what I was thinking and how I was thinking, and introducing me to people and perspectives that I might not even have thought about. And reaffirmed that what I was thinking was right. But early on it was admitting who I was and what I was, and especially what I was living with, because so many people were dying in the closet and not saying that they were living with HIV and AIDS. And I was among the first in the Cleveland area as an entertainer to do that, and before I died. How close to the first, I don't know. Can't prove anything. But I was among the first, and I was very vocal about that, and it's one of the things I'm the proudest about, because it gave not just a voice but also a face to a whole community that was so silent and living in shame when there shouldn't have been any shame in the first place.
Now, Charlie, I have to say this, is that when I listened to you, the fact that you were excited about the drag thing, going back to drag, because
I missed it.
Once we get in drag and you get that fever, you never forget, because you always want to be beautiful. You want to dress up. You want to feel excited. You want to entertain. You just want to just be fabulous. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I was terrified 2 days before, to the point that I was almost sick. I was so terrified. And Circle JJ's had a lot of royalty there, including the owner of Mr. and Miss Gay America. And when I learned that, I'm like, oh God. I hadn't been there on stage in 18 years. There was somebody there that has performed 50 years. And I'm like sitting in my room thinking, well, girl, if you hadn't retired, you'd have 36 yourself. What are you scared of? And it's all going to come back once the music starts and your face is on. And sitting there doing it, it was like, well, I actually had somebody do it for me. I didn't realize how much I missed the smell of grease paint and powder.
Yep. You
and
know,
putting on the wig, and the whole thing. It was like this whole aspect of my life that's been gone for so long, and I understand why I did what I did. Why it was so long, I don't know.
Well,
hopefully it's the start of something new again. I don't know. We'll wait and see.
Don't be ashamed to just dress up and be fabulous, Charlie. You don't have nothing to be shy about. Dressing up is fabulous. Look at you. Yes, you did. I was gonna say you look great today, and of course you added that little touch.
It was my mother's.
It's called the touch. Add that little touch.
Well, and the topic was sissy
Oh.
get done.
Oh.
Friends recently said that I was either a new Truman Capote or a much younger Leslie Jordan. And when they said that, I'm like, well, thank you, honey.
Oh.
That was a compliment.
Charlie, it was great talking to you today.
Oh, you too. Thank you so much for this.
You were wonderful, and you explained a lot for us. And I just want to say, I tell everybody this. I take my wig off to you because you are doing amazing things for yourself, for your partner, for just your life. You're now educating other people in our community and around the world that you're not alone, and we're not alone, and we're here together. And the fact that you did so many miraculous things through some bad times in your life goes to show you, with determination and a sense to make a difference, and in a sense to want to live.
You're gonna make me cry.
I'm sorry. I take my wig off to you, and congratulations on the 3 books. Congratulations on your relationship. Stay strong, my friend. And
thank you.
Thank you for the story. It was inspirational and inspiring, and I'm grateful I met you.
I am too. I am so happy I reached out to you to have this conversation, and I hope it changes people's opinions and the way they think, or at least question why they do. I think that's the most important thing. Why do I think the way that I think, and what really is behind all of that?
Wonderful.
And who am I to sit back and judge? I mean, really.
Ladies and gentlemen, on my show today, I had Mr. Charlie Dale on talking about his story, about coming from a conservative background in Southern churches, and just his life as a gay man, going through many difficult situations that a lot of us are going through today. And hopefully his story will help and inspire others that they can do the impossible. And you can survive. You can survive, you can live, you can thrive. And I say this in a sense, we're all in this together. We're human beings. And this pandemic has shown us all that we are human beings and we're in this together. So thank you today, Charlie Dale, for
you're welcome.
And we're going to be friends until the day we, say hello to the glorious, glittery clouds.
And friends even then.
And there you go.
Big dragon in the sky.
Oh. All right, thanks, Charlie.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'll talk to you later.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.